Teacher expels farmer's son. The next day, a helicopter lands and everyone is stunned. A fall morning at Westfield High School, Austin, Texas, was no different from any other morning. The whole school was bustling with the sound of hurried footsteps, lively conversations among students, and the vibrant atmosphere of desks awaiting unfinished tests and assignments. However, amidst all the commotion, there was one person standing quietly, as if they did not belong to this place. Jacob, a boy from a small farming family, quietly walked through the long hallway of the school with a pair of eyes filled with vague worry. Unlike the other students who always donned trendy outfits and exuded confidence, Jacob felt like a lost ghost in this vast space. Even though he tried to fit in, he couldn't deny the stark difference between himself and his classmates. The tousled hair, the old boots covered in mud from days spent working in the fields, the rough, calloused hands from years of hard labor, all these signs could not hide Jacob's background. He was the only one who didn't belong to the upper class at Westfield School. The other students come from families of high social status, but Jacob does not. Every time he walked into the classroom, the gazes of those around him seemed always filled with mockery and disdain. The awkward teasing, the strange and discriminatory looks never made Jacob feel comfortable. The feeling of social difference is not only something Jacob perceives through the eyes of others, but it is also a lingering worry in his heart, a feeling that always torments him whenever he sees the other students around him. That feeling was like a small fire always burning in his heart, making each step heavy and each word a challenge. Jacob not only fought against external prejudices, but also against himself in a persistent inner battle about where he truly belonged. The relationship between Jacob and Miss Whitmore is always tense, especially whenever he has to face her in class. Miss Whitmore, the history teacher famous for her strictness and cold demeanor, seems to never hide her contempt for Jacob. Every time she looked at him, that gaze seemed to be judging not only his intellect, but also the humble background of Jacob's family. She often let out mocking remarks, shaking her head and sighing when mentioning Jacob having to work on the farm every morning. Her words were like an invisible knife, cutting deep into him, making him feel even smaller, unworthy of a place here. And then, one day, when the class was quiet and Miss Whitmore was lecturing, she suddenly called out Jacob's name. He couldn't help but startle. That morning, Jacob had to get up at dawn, working tirelessly on the farm, exhausting himself to help his family. He had just sat down in class, closing his eyes for a moment to regain some alertness, when Miss Whitmore asked him to answer a tricky question about the French Revolution. Although he had been listening to the lecture, his mind was still hazy and tired, and Jacob's answer became vague and stammering. Without thinking, he awkwardly uttered unclear words, causing not only Miss Whitmore but the entire class to burst into laughter. But Miss Whitmore didn't stop there. Instead of helping, she continued to mock and ridicule him with harsh words. "Maybe you're more concerned with plowing the fields than studying like the other students, right, Jacob?" The whole class burst into laughter, and Jacob could only stand there, feeling like his heart was beating stronger than ever, pounding so hard that he couldn't anything but the thumping in his chest. The looks from his classmates cut into his heart like knives. Each laugh, each mocking word made Jacob feel more embarrassed and weaker, as if all the efforts over the years were in vain. He just wished he could disappear, not stand in front of this classroom, not endure that disdainful gaze. The feeling of shame and hurt made Jacob stand still, his hands clenched tightly, his nails digging into his palms as if trying to calm himself down. He felt all eyes on him, the boisterous laughter still echoing in his ears. But as time went on, he felt something different rising within him. Not fear or cowardice, but a longing for respect, a feeling he had never had the courage to seek. You know that if you keep sinking into this silence and shame, you will never escape the shadow of yourself. With a deep breath, Jacob stood up straight, his gaze no longer looking down. He looked straight into Miss Whitmore's eyes, not with resentment or anger, but with a determination he never thought he could find. His lips trembled slightly, but he did not back down. "I'm not as smart as you guys," Jacob said, each word coming out like a difficult confession. "But I deserve respect." This statement was like a powerful echo, awakening everyone from their silence. And in that moment, Jacob felt something change within himself. It was not just simple words, but a declaration of self respect, of the right to be treated fairly, regardless of background or circumstances. All the eyes in the classroom seemed to be focused on him, but this time, Jacob didn't feel scared anymore. That statement, although simple, marked a turning point in his life. From an oppressed boy, always shrinking in loneliness and humiliation, now Jacob begins to understand that he has the right to stand up, the right to demand respect like anyone else. He is no longer a ghost in this classroom, but a human being, with values and self-respect deserving of recognition. The next day, an unexpected event occurred at Westfield School, making the already lively atmosphere even more buzzing than ever. A large helicopter suddenly landed on the schoolyard, creating a wave of astonishment among the students. The roaring engine of the helicopter drew everyone's attention to the courtyard. No one had ever thought that such a vehicle would appear at the school, where only luxury cars usually parked. The entire classroom suddenly fell into an unusual silence. No one could take their eyes off the strange scene unfolding before them. When the helicopter door opened, a middle-aged man stepped out, dressed in dark attire, but his demeanor exuded confidence and authority. That is Mr. James Miller, Jacob's grandfather. Mr. Miller is no stranger to the upper echelons of Texas society. On the contrary, he is a famous farmer, owning a powerful agricultural business empire with farms spread across the state. In the eyes of many, he is a symbol of success and power in the agricultural industry. With his strong appearance and confident smile, he has always been a highly influential figure, and the name Miller is known by everyone. The unexpected appearance of Mr. Miller shocked all the students in the school, especially Miss Whitmore. The strict teacher, who always prided herself on her knowledge of her students' families, was now surprised to realize that Jacob was not just a farmer boy, as she had thought. Surely she had never known that behind Jacob's humble beginnings was a family with great potential and influence. Miss Whitmore stood frozen, unable to believe her eyes, when she saw Mr. Miller step out of the helicopter, completely unlike what she had imagined about the family of the student she had always looked down upon. Miss Whitmore's eyes could not hide her confusion, and a sense of uncertainty began to creep into her heart. Certainly, Mr. Miller's appearance not only changed her perception of Jacob, but also transformed the entire way this teacher interacted with the students she once deemed inferior. Mr. Miller strode decisively towards Miss Whitmore, his gaze sharp as a knife, without the slightest hesitation. The entire campus seemed to be engulfed in silence as he approached, each of his steps making the atmosphere even more tense. When he stopped in front of Miss Whitmore, everyone watched. No one dared to speak. Miss Whitmore stood there, her face stiff, gripping the folder tightly in her hands, but her eyes betrayed her worry. "Do you think you have the right to insult Jacob like that?" Mr. Miller's voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for everyone to hear every word. Each word he spoke was like a strong blow to Miss Whitmore's heart, leaving her unable to react immediately. Miss Whitmore tried to calm herself. Her voice became firm, but still somewhat awkward. "I always strive to be fair in my work, Mr. Miller. I have never intended to offend Jacob or any other student." But Mr. Miller didn't give her a chance to explain. He looked her straight in the eye, his gaze resolute. "Fairness?" he scoffed, his voice becoming even colder. "You talk about fairness while mocking a boy just because of his background? Do you think working-class families like Jacob's don't deserve respect?" Miss Whitmore stiffened. Mr. Miller's words were like an undeniable accusation. She could not deny that she had allowed bias and prejudice to guide her actions. Mr. Miller continued, his voice now like a declaration. "Do you know that manual laborers like Jacob are the ones who sustain this country? Without them, there would be no fields, no products that you and the other students consume every day." Mr. Miller did not stop. His anger was replaced by a cold, logical demeanor. "You have the responsibility not only to teach your students knowledge, but also to teach them about mutual respect, regardless of their background or profession. You have no right to look down on anyone just because they are not as fortunate as you. And I ask you to reconsider your attitude towards Jacob. Otherwise, I will not hesitate to bring this issue to the administration." Miss Whitmore was silent, unable to refute Mr. Miller's words. His words were a profound lesson not only for her, but also for everyone who was witnessing. From that moment, Miss Whitmore understood that she could no longer behave that way, not only because of Mr. Phi Miller, but also out of respect for her students and the values she always took pride in teaching. Jacob stood still for a moment, his eyes fixed on Miss Whitmore and Mr. Miller. Although everyone was focused on the tense confrontation between them, he felt the world around him gradually quieting down, leaving only the powerful beating of his own heart. The tension in the air was like a tightly stretched guitar string, and then, in that moment, Jacob felt an invisible strength rising from deep within. He couldn't let himself continue living in silence, couldn't let prejudices blur his self-worth. Unlike before, when he always remained silent, now Jacob stepped up decisively. He opened his mouth, his voice deep and full of confidence, capturing the attention of all the eyes in the classroom. "I don't need special treatment," Jacob said without hesitation. "I just want to be respected like everyone else." That statement not only echoed in the air, but also served as a strong affirmation of his worth. For Jacob, nothing is more important than respect. You don't need to rely on money, status, or family reputation to be recognized. You just need to be treated fairly, like anyone else in this class. Those words were a liberation for him, an affirmation that despite his humble beginnings, he still deserved to be treated with respect and fairness. That was the moment that marked Jacob's character development. From a shy boy who always shrank away from the pressures around him, Jacob has now become someone who knows how to stand up for himself, daring to stand up and defend the values he believes in. He is no longer the silent shadow in the classroom, but an individual with confidence and conviction. And in that moment, Jacob realized that sometimes all it takes is the courage to speak up, and you can change the way the whole world perceives you. The whole class fell silent as Jacob's words echoed, the atmosphere heavy, yet filled with anticipation. Miss Whitmore stood there, her gaze seemingly clouded by the pressure of the truth she had been trying to avoid. The resilience in Jacob's eyes was like a powerful reflection, forcing her to confront the mistakes she had long been unaware of. A minute of silence stretched out, and finally, Miss Whitmore took a deep breath, then slowly bowed her head. "Jacob," her voice was gentle but full of sincerity, I am sorry." Miss Whitmore could not deny that she was wrong. In the past few months, she had allowed prejudice and narrow-mindedness to dictate her actions. But today, standing before Jacob's resilience, she realized that she had not only hurt him, but also lost the beauty of the fairness she always preached. Miss Whitmore's apology was not just an acknowledgement of her mistake, but also a turning point in her own thinking and perspective. She understood that the job of a teacher is not just to impart knowledge, but also a great responsibility in creating a fair and respectful environment for all students. And today she witnessed the power of patience, sincerity, and self-respect in a student she had once underestimated. Miss Whitmore looked up, her eyes no longer bearing the arrogance they once had, but instead reflecting humility and a clear awareness of her mistakes. She looked at Jacob, not just with the eyes of a teacher, but as a woman who realized that change begins with oneself. "I will learn to see people more fairly, and I am very sorry for what happened." Jacob just nodded, no need to say anything more. That apology, though brief, was enough for him to sense the change in Miss Whitmore. That was an important step, not only for her, but also for everyone witnessing this moment. The whole class was no longer silent. Instead, there were looks of surprise and respect, as if some kind of miracle had just happened in this small space. Since that day, everything has changed. Jacob was no longer the quiet boy sitting in the corner of the classroom, always bowing his head out of a sense of inferiority. He walks around the school with a new demeanor, not thanks to Mr. Miller's influence or his family's wealth, but thanks to the self-esteem and self-respect he has found within himself. Each step Jacob takes now is no longer filled with anxiety, but rather with confidence and steadiness. He is no longer afraid to look into the eyes of those around him because he has learned to face himself and knows that he deserves respect. The schoolmates who used to mock and look down on him now begin to see Jacob in a different light. Although there were surprised looks and a few whispers, no one dared to look down on him anymore. Jacob has shown everyone that a person's worth is not measured by family or material possessions, but by dignity, resilience, and self respect. The story of Jacob is not just the story of a farmer boy, but the story of a person standing up to defend himself and the values he believes in. His story has become a lesson not only for those around him, but also for himself. Jacob understood that no matter where life took him, only self respect could guide him through all challenges. And the most important thing is, you don't need to change yourself to fit society's expectations. You can stay true to yourself while still shining naturally and powerfully. Jacob's story is not just a personal journey, but also a profound lesson about respect and fairness. It conveys a powerful message that a person's worth is not determined by social status or material wealth, but by their character and hard work. Jacob, despite coming from a farming family, with his resilience and self-respect, proved that everyone deserves to be treated fairly, regardless of class or wealth. The lesson conveyed by the story is the affirmation that workers, even when toiling hard in simple jobs, are no less valuable than the wealthy or those in power. Every drop of sweat, every effort in labor brings value to society, and no one should be despised or undervalued just because of their job. Everyone, from farmers and workers to leaders, has the right to be treated with equal respect. Jacob's story also reminds us that when we can perceive the value of a person comprehensively, transcending superficial prejudices, we will create a more just society where each individual is respected for who they are, not for their circumstances or background.